I'm sure.
Okay, you've clicked for recording. Great.
Yeah,
Tell you what, you stay where you are, and I'll just talk loudly with your screen in the background for a couple of minutes.
works for me.
Okay, because Zoom was playing silly devils just now, to say the least. We've been trying to get in since 6:30. And it's not just me and my famed computer skills. My wife's an IT professional, and she flies it, so it's all good.
What do you want? Peterson.
Yeah, I can't even get you my picture up there today.
Should I stop sharing my screen?
If that's your first screen, you can leave it there, my friend.
Okay.
And I will just chat for a couple of minutes with some announcements, and people don't have to look at my my glorious features tonight. We've got a few minutes to go. I cannot get over this. It's so dark outside now. Oh my God.
Being recorded.
Is the wood stork still down your way, Tony?
Not heard anything today. Did you see? Oh, Angie says she did see a report for it for today.
Cool.
The ever unreliable woodstock. I'm just messaging back to Steve McGrath, who was having his supper. Yeah. Put my phone on don't disturb so that doesn't go off. So I can ask everybody to make sure they're muted, and as long as you can hear Avery and unfortunately myself, we'll give it a couple of minutes and we can start tonight's meeting. I got a few notes and a few announcements to start in a moment, and then we'll rock and roll. Like I said, I can't just get over how dark it's getting so early now. It was 17 degrees here in Yarmouth earlier on. It was just gorgeous sunshine. And look at it now. Oh. And the last time we met, Avery, was out west, probably at Rocky Point, I think.
Yeah, that's right. You were there, was it 2015?
Oh, I can't remember. Been out there a few times
2016?
since.
Yeah.
Whenever we're out on the island with the family, always go to Rocky Point and the usual Swan Lake and Island View Park and all the other spots around there.
Yeah.
And I always bitch and whine that the trees are too damn tall out there and you can't see anything in the woods. Oh,
Well, come up to the Yukon here. You don't have to worry about tall trees.
9 million years in the making.
Yukon, yeah. That's probably not going to happen, unfortunately. So you're in the Yukon right now?
Yeah. My partner and I moved up to Whitehorse in 22.
Yeah, I'm gonna go keep putting stuff away while I'm on this call.
Can I ask folks to mute if they could, please? I don't have host privileges, so I can't mute all of you at the moment like I usually would, so please check you're all muted. Yeah. What the heck's the birding like up in the Yukon, Avery? If you don't mind me asking, I just don't know.
It's quite good. Spring and early summer are good. Fall's a little bit light on birds compared with most areas in Canada.
Yeah.
And then the winter is pretty dire. But spring's
Ravens
great
and
for
things.
shorebirds and waterfowl, and there's some nice sort of tundra habitats you can get up into in the summer. Rick Whitman, who I can see here, and Richard Stern came up this summer and joined me for a week, and we went out birding and did some birding in the mountains and in the tundra and at some of the lakes and saw some nice things, ptarmigan and Smith's longspurs and Pacific loons and
Wow.
whatnot. So yeah, it's good.
Cool.
And there's good potential for some of the kind of Asian vagrants. Like we had a Siberian pipit this fall, and we've had Arctic warbler and common crane, hawfinch, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that far from Russia to Alaska to you. Well, it's
Yeah,
far, but it's not that big a stretch. I mean, heck, if a Steller seagull can make it out there and out to us and then on to Newfie,
yeah, exactly.
who knows? Well, it's just after 7 o'clock. Good evening, folks. Tony here, NSBS president. I tend to talk too much and go off at a tangent. I do apologize. But anyway, fall migration is winding down. And if the truth be known, it's been a little bit quiet for us personally down here in Cape Fichu, but other areas have had some awesome birds. The long-staying and rather unreliable, as I always say, woodstock on Briar. I think it took us 2 goes to find that one. Great bird. The black-throated grey in Lower Sackville and the sharp-tailed sandpiper at Heartland Point. Those 3 stand out. But that sharp-tailed sandpiper last Sunday, Angie and I got up at stupid o'clock in the morning and drove up to Heartland Point, and it looks like we missed it by 5 or 6 minutes, and I don't believe it's been seen since.
4 hours.
That was a very, very long way both ways, and anyway, good to be in Dartmouth and hit Costco, but my goodness, we would have liked to see the bird. And I'd like to personally invite everybody to a couple of upcoming NSBS events. We do have our AGM coming up on November the 8th at the Museum of Natural History on Summer Street. As usual, our ancestral home, we'll call it. It's going to be from 1 p.m. in the afternoon, and we're not going to be clashing with anything like the Parade of Lights or any crazy stuff in Halifax, hopefully. We'll have the usual summary of the year, election of directors, and reports, etc., etc. Great chance to catch up with old and new friends, and afterwards we're going to have nibbles and soft drinks, etc., etc. We're going to have some bird-related stuff for sale, some merch, and hopefully some new merch that I'm quite excited about. So please, love to see you there. We're also going to have an extra Zoom meeting at the end of November. We don't usually hold one due to the fact it's the AGM in November, but unless will be announced in the next couple of days, we are rescheduling AMAR's gull identification meeting that unfortunately had to get cancelled a couple of months ago due to a bereavement in the family. His, not ours, sorry. So the information will be up shortly, and I'm very, very excited for that one. It's going to be interesting because gulls can be difficult, as Angie says. Yeah. We're also pleased to announce that the NSBS is going to be relaunching our Instagram feed page, etc., etc. So we're going to be using it for sharing bird photos and stories once again. Just tag the at NS Bird Society for a chance to be featured. Lots of updates on club news, meetings, outings, volunteer, etc., opportunities, educational tidbits, etc., etc., and a bit more birding humour. It'll be a little bit less structured than the Facebook group, and very, very excited for that starting. And thank you very much to Kelly Sue for taking that on. And we're really onto the main event. Trip leader Avery Bartels is going to share some photos and highlights of the November 2024 Avocet Tour to Guyana. 4 NSBS members were on board with that one. And I'll be truthful, when you think of birding in South America, I personally, I don't think of Guyana. I think of Ecuador. I think of Costa Rica, etc., etc. So I'm really looking forward to this. It's going to be quite fascinating. So over to you, Avery. Let's go to South America.
Okay, thanks, Tony. And as you say, Guyana is not kind of the first place that people will go in South America usually, but once you've done a visit to Colombia or Ecuador, Peru, maybe some of those other sites, then Guyana is kind of one of those next on the list. It has a lot to offer, and as you shall see, pretty good photo opportunities and excellent birding. So as Tony mentioned, this was an Avocet Tours trip that I had arranged in November of last year. And 4 Nova Scotians were with us: Dave McCorkadale, Ken McKenna, Rick Whitman, and Pat McKay. And the trip was arranged with the help of Leon Moore, who was our local guide. And Leon has been guiding trips in Guyana for about, I think, 15 plus years. He's got a great YouTube channel where he's got various videos of his exploits. A multi-sectional one on a trip up Mount Roraima he did with some friends. And this presentation is not brought to you by Coca-Cola, despite what it looks like. So Guyana is a pretty small country. It's smaller than the size of the UK, and then the population is only about 3/4 And so it's got a lot of wilderness and not much impact, which is pretty nice, especially in comparison with some of the other more westerly South American nations. So English is the official language, as well as a few different indigenous languages. And with 850 bird species, there's a ratio of greater than 1 bird species per 1,000 humans, which I think is pretty enviable. The economy is not super varied. Agriculture, mining, and ecotourism kind of make up the bulk of it. But just a few years ago, huge oil reserves were found off the coast of the country, off there and off Venezuela. And since then, the country's seen about 50% growth in the economy. And you see that when you're down there, there's a lot of infrastructure projects going on all around, a lot of redoing of roads and putting up of buildings, and the one national highway that goes through the country, which is currently unpaved, is slated to be paved in the coming years, which could quite change the birding dynamic down there. So Guyana is located on the north coast of South America, between Venezuela, Suriname, and Brazil. And it is part of a ecoregion called the Guianan Shield, and that basically encompasses the area north of the Amazon River, and then kind of into eastern Colombia and west as far as French Guiana. And within that ecotone, there's about 45 bird species that are endemic to the lowlands. And then within the Tepuy Mountains, which is kind of the area in this sort of eastern Venezuela and just squeaking into Guyana and a little bit into Suriname, there's another 25 or so bird species that are endemic to the highlands, but very difficult to access. So being a pretty small country and with only real access to the lowlands, no access, as I mentioned, to the mountains, the habitats that you have available are not super varied. Principally, lowland tropical rainforest makes up about 80% of the country. And then there's savannas down in the southwest. And within the tropical rainforest habitats, you have mostly just kind of the typical lowland forest, but there are these patches of white sand forest, which is a quite distinct habitat type. It's very nutrient poor, so the vegetation tends to be lower. It's more kind of shrubby and small trees. And with that comes a unique set of birds. And then within both the savanna and rainforest habitats, you've got rivers, and so the river edges and the beaches and whatnot kind of create their own little microhabitat. So you can see our trip here. This is the map of our eBird lists. So we started up on the coast in Georgetown, flew down to kind of the central part of the country near Awakrama Lodge, and then just worked our way south to Lethem and the savannas there. And then from Lethem, we flew back to Georgetown and then did a little post-tour day trip out to Kiter Falls. So around Georgetown, we got started with some birding at the Botanical Garden, which is just like 15 minutes or so from our hotel. And there are a few species there in the more coastal areas that we wouldn't be getting elsewhere on the trip. And these included blood-colored woodpecker and white-bellied piculet, which we saw. We ended up going to the Botanical Gardens, I think, 2 times, and we saw them well on both visits. And the other main target there was the festive parrot, which we also saw very nicely, alongside a bunch of other more widespread parrot species like orange-winged parrot and blue-headed parrot. There weren't a lot of hummingbirds, unlike elsewhere in South America, such as the Andes, where you get massive hummingbird diversity. Lowlands, you don't tend to get quite as much. And around Georgetown itself, we more or less just saw these plain-bellied emeralds, although they were quite common. And there's orange-winged parrot, another species we saw very nicely there. And Dave got this fantastic photo, palm frond. And it was a good spot to just kind of get acquainted with some of the common South American birds again, such as straight-billed woodcreeper, crimson-crested woodpecker, both fairly widespread lowland species. And we had a really nice encounter with a zone-tailed hawk, which just circled right over us for a minute or two. And then the big surprise at the Botanical Gardens was this orange-breasted falcon that Leon had found a few weeks prior. And they're a species that's very widespread in the neotropics, but tend to be extremely local, usually in areas where there's cliffs or kind of waterfall scenarios like Kaitur Falls. We also saw them there, but this one had just showed up a few weeks prior, and it was hanging around and showed very nicely for us. So outside of Georgetown, we did a little trip to the Mahaica River, where we spent about an hour just cruising along in a little boat, and the main target here being Watson, which are the national bird of Guyana. And I was a little bit surprised that they don't seem to be more widespread on the rivers. We ended up doing 3 river trips on the main portion of the tour, and we didn't see them anywhere else, but just here at the Mahaica River. They're a very prehistoric, bizarre-looking bird. They occur mostly in big groups along rivers, and then they nest on they put their platform nests in the trees over the water. And the young ones have little spurs on their shoulders, which help them clamber around in the branches should they fall out of the nest. We also visited a mangrove site in the neighborhood of Enmore, just on the outskirts of the city, and got nice looks at just one scarlet ibis, but it shows very nicely. And then we also got fantastic views of this mangrove cuckoo, which was one we were hoping for, but we didn't have super high expectations, but luck was on our side, and there it was. And the main bird we were looking for in the mangroves was mangrove rail, which is one of the species that was split when clapper rail was split. And mangrove rail is the one that occurs down into northern South America. And this one, again, we got really lucky. It just came right in, came right out on the into the open on this concrete, concrete wall below us, and showed real nice.
Excuse me for a minute, Avery.
Yeah.
Someone needs to mute. I can hear talking in the background.
Okay, hopefully that's sorted. The last site we went to around Georgetown was called Bounty Farm, and it's just an agricultural, I think an experimental farm. There are a bunch of fruit trees and whatnot. It was a good site for a few species we wouldn't be seeing elsewhere on the trip. Green-tailed jacamar we saw a few places, but we got our best looks here. And I got a little video of one calling. Watch. You can see how the iridescence changes as it moves itself. Nope. So one of the main birds we were looking for here was slender-billed kite, which is another kind of widespread but very local species in South America. And and we got great looks at this one. Unfortunately, I had just nipped off to the bathroom, so I missed this, but luckily we spotted it again flying over, so I didn't miss out completely. But the group got to watch this adult here just screaming away for several minutes from its perch. And we also found a nest of striated herons in one of the citrus trees. There are these two chicks just hanging out about a meter or so from their nest. It looked like they'd probably just fledged within the last few days. And of course, anywhere in South America where there's water, there tends to be wattled jacanas. So we ended up seeing them in quite a few places. So after our couple days in Georgetown, we hopped in a 13-seater plane and flew about an hour down to the Iwacrama Lodge. And I got a video here of our landing. And this is kind of what it looked like. Most of the flight was just endless forest with every now and then you'd get a little bit of, you'd see a little gold mine or something down there disrupting the landscape. And that's the National Highway in all its glory. And then when we stepped out of the plane, it was just like stepping into a furnace. It was so hot. But luckily, once we got into the rainforest, the difference between inside the rainforest and out on the open tarmac was probably 7 or 8 degrees. A little more manageable, at least. So our first port of call in the rainforest portion of the tour was at the Iwacrama River Lodge. And we flew right over it, so we got a nice view of it as we were coming in. And right on the waterfront below our cabins, there were several pairs of these swallowing puffbirds, which they dig their own nests and they burrow these holes into even just flat ground or in kind of sandy banks. And then after lunch, we hit the trails, and one of our first Guianan Shield specialties was a Morel guan, which is a fairly localized species. We ended up seeing them twice, but it's one that you can miss in Guyana. And our first full day there, we did a boat trip to start off to head to the Turtle Mountain Trail. And on the boat ride, we got nice looks at quite a few birds along the riverside, including great blackhawk and the sunbittern that actually flew across the river in front of us. So we got to see its beautiful wing patterns. They've got this stunning kind of orange and yellow pattern, almost like a butterfly's wing. You can just sort of almost get a hint of it in this photo from Dave. Then on the Turtle Mountain Trail, the birding was a little bit slow at first, but we got out to this clearing where there was a little house where the rangers sometimes stay. And there was this fruiting cecropia tree, and in it we got a pair of Guianan toucanets, which are another one of the Guianan Shield specialties. And around the Iwacrama Lodge on the trails there, we got black-bellied cuckoo, which is a fairly widespread Amazonian species and a big one. It's I don't know, probably 18 inches, so quite a bit bigger than the yellow-billed and black-billed cuckoos. It's widespread, but fairly scarce. This was the only one we saw on the trip. And from the big to the tiny, we saw short-tailed pygmy tyrant once or twice as well along the entrance road to the lodge. And you hear them quite a bit. So if you know what they sound like, their little frog-like call, you can kind of eventually find them. But these guys are only about 2.5 inches long. So when they're crunched up like this, they're hardly larger than about a toonie. And them and their closely related black-capped pygmy tyrant are the smallest passerines in North America, or in the Americas, rather. Guyana is one of the better spots to see jaguars, but unfortunately for us, this was as close as we would come, seeing these prints on the side of the road. We spent an afternoon birding just the side of the main highway. Luckily, there's not much traffic along there, and so it's good for kind of birding along the edge habitats, and we got great looks at a pair of waved woodpeckers. This genus, Celeus, there's several species, and they are all just really fantastic looking birds, usually shades of kind of cinnamon and black and red. And red fan parrot, we got a nice views of a pair of them just sitting along the side of the road. Quite a unique looking parrot with their long tail and purple fringing on their underparts. And if you catch them at the right time, they've got this kind of crest that they can raise and fan out with these really neat kind of red tips. And our next stop was at a lodge, where this trio of black curassows, which were wild, but were very much accustomed to birders and people coming in, and they would get fed scraps from the kitchen and whatnot. So they were the volunteer greeters. And, you know, as any good volunteer greeter would, they came and checked up on you, even sometimes as you're in the bathroom. Brushing my teeth in this case, one came and poked its head over the wall. And sometimes they even looked like real wild birds sitting in the trees. So from Atta Lodge, this was the only area where we had access to the white sand forest that I mentioned earlier. And there were a few specialty species here that we didn't spend a lot of time in the white sand forest, just one little session in the afternoon, and then another short session one morning. But we picked up black mannequin, which is one of the specialties. Dave did very well to get a good photo of this one because we only saw it for a few seconds. And then spotted puffbird was another one of the white sand specialties that we got nice looks at. The nice thing about puffbirds is once you see them, they tend to sort of sit still, like trogons. And white-tailed trogon was another one we saw several times throughout our time in the rainforest area. And then alongside one of the trails at Atta Lodge, our local indigenous guide, showed us this gray-breasted saber-wing nest, which I thought was quite interesting. It looks like it's put a bunch of liverworts around the outside of it. And Atta Lodge is most famous for its canopy towers and walkway. At this stage, by the time our visit came around, they only had one tower still in use. The others had kind of fallen into disarray. But we spent a morning there, and Ken posed nicely on the walkway there. And while we didn't see a whole lot from up on top of the tower itself, a few kind of distant things, pompadour cotingas and a couple parrot species and some flycatchers. On the way up there, we did get great looks at a great jacamar, which is actually a species we saw a few times. I'm used to them being quite rare throughout most of their range, but they seem to have a pretty healthy population in Guyana. And then the next morning, we had a full day just kind of birding around the lodge and trails and the adjacent road. And one of the big targets that we connected with was Guianan red cotinga, the really fantastic looking bird, like most of the cotingas. But we were fortunate to see a pair, and we got to watch them for a couple minutes. And there's a little bit low light, distant for great photos, but they posed reasonably well for us. And another one of the specialty birds for Atta Lodge itself is the black-faced hawk, which there is a nest of along one of the trails. And while the nest itself wasn't active, there was one adult still in the area, so we got nice looks at it. And during an afternoon session out along the main road, Ken was quick with his camera and got this picture of a flyover hawk, which we were able to identify from his photo as a bicolored hawk, which is a fairly widespread but scarce species in most of its range, including in Guyana. Our guide Leon had only seen them a couple times. We also did some owling at both Awakrama and Atta Lodge, and connected with a couple spectacled owls, two adults one night and then a juvenile another night. as well as some other species like blackish nightjar. And then right around the at a lodge itself, there was a white-winged potu which roosts, or not roosts, but it comes to a perch to hunt from every night. And unfortunately, we got pretty good looks in the scope, but it was a little bit kind of dark and far to get photos of. And then at our next lodge, we spent some time looking for this tawny-bellied screech owl, and with a bit of patience, we ended up getting really nice looks. Another one, I got a video of it singing. Pretty classic screech owl song. So Surama Lodge is where the rainforest starts connecting with the savanna, and this was our first time where we started getting into some different habitat and savanna birds. Just a little pocket of savanna habitat around the lodge itself here that Leon is trying to get us on ocellated crake, which ultimately we would only hear. Unsurprisingly, given how dense the grass is there, it's pretty hard to see a little crake scuttling around in it. We did get nice looks at some singing wedge-tailed grass finches, though, and a lesser nighthawk that was roosting on a branch just beside the trail. I always love seeing these roosting nighthawks. The patterning of their feathers is just so fantastic. And then right around the Surama Lodge itself, there were some fruiting trees, in this case here a guava. And on our first afternoon, this red-throated caracara came in. And unlike most of the other caracaras, which are principally scavengers, the red-throated eats a lot of fruit. So I think it was coming in to check and see if there were any ripe fruit. I don't recall it actually feeding this time. And our full day at Surama was spent mostly in a boat heading down the Bora Bora River, and the water was quite low, and we ended up getting stuck on this fallen tree. And so our local indigenous guide, as you do, just hopped out of the boat and scampered along the log, jumped up and down on it a few times to try and shake us loose, all while keeping his binoculars around his neck. It was an impressive performance. And along the Bora Bora River, we actually saw sungrebe a few times. For those who've traveled in the neotropics, this is often a target species, and it can be quite scarce, but evidently the Bora Bora River is a good spot for it. And one of the times we saw it, the first time actually, it was perched up, and you can see the photo inset here, Ken's photo. They've got very neat feet, sort of similar shape to a coot with the flattened out appendages, but with the black and yellow patterning. Rufescent tiger herons are pretty common species, but they're so gorgeous that it's always worth including a photo if one has one. And then along the banks, we saw a couple blue-throated piping guans, and one good measure of hunting pressure in an area is how often you see guans. So this was a good indication that there wasn't much pressure from the local communities. And edge habitats like rivers can be really good for spotting kind of sit and wait hunters, things like trogons and jacamars and the such, puffbirds. So this was the only spot we saw a Guianan puffbird. Unfortunately, it was a bit far to get a decent photo, but we did get really nice looks at this Guianan trogon. And we also saw a few raptors along the boat ride, including this black hawk eagle right beside the river here. And then the principal goal of this boat ride was to get to this harpy eagle nest. So it took us about 3 hours to get to the nest itself. So we only had time to spend about 2 hours watching the nest, but we got nice looks at the few-month-old young one and a few other birds in the areas, but unfortunately the adults didn't come in to visit while we were there. But it's still quite impressive to see that nest structure is probably about 3 meters across. And it's just this huge, I think a ceiba tree. And as we were watching it, we had this little green and rufous kingfisher come in and land in the vines right beside us, which is probably the hardest of the neotropical kingfisher species to see. So we were quite pleased to get nice looks at it. And in the end, we actually saw it several times over the course of the tour. On the boat ride, we also saw some mammals, including giant otters. This pair, we were there initially out more in the open, but for myself, by the time I got my camera up, they kind of scooted off into the vegetation here. And so for those who aren't familiar, their name is really appropriate. They are a big otter. They're probably 2.5 meters long, the full-grown adults. And on one of our next boat ride on the Rupununi River, we saw an adult and the 2 young ones get out of the river and climb up this bank. So we really got to appreciate the full size of an adult. So from Surama, we went out into the savannah proper. And our first port of call was Cayman House, where we spent a couple nights. And Cayman House is just located just back from the banks of the Rupununi River. And it is so called because they've been undertaking research on the endangered black caiman in the area for, I think, a couple decades now. And as you can see, we took another boat trip there and saw plenty of ringed kingfishers and Amazon kingfishers, and then other sort of waterside species like pied water tyrant. And on one of the beaches, we came across a pair of pied plovers, which are really one of my favorite neotropical birds. I just love their patterning, a little red eye ring and feet. And I was a bit surprised that this was actually the only time we saw capybaras. Elsewhere where I've been in kind of savanna habitats in South America, they can be quite common, but I guess maybe with it just being in general a little drier in the savannas of Guyana, maybe that was why they weren't more widespread, but we got nice looks at this duo just kind of hanging out on the riverbank. And we spent a bit of time just birding the dry forests along the edge of the river and got looks at a few nice species such as black crested ant shrike and burnished buff tanager. And one of the main targets for the area was giant anteaters. So our first morning, we got up early and headed out before sunrise so we could get to the best area for the anteater as close to sunrise as possible. And this worked out perfectly. I think it was, not even 6:30. We ended up spotting one crossing the road ahead of us. We caught up to it and ended up getting views of it as it sort of sauntered by and did a little feeding. It had obviously been quite wet. I think it must have rained overnight, so you can see it was pretty sodden. And you hear the brown-throated parakeets in the background there. So being in a new habitat meant there were new birds and new target birds to look for. And one of these was the white-tailed golden throat, which is one of the hummingbird species that only really occurs out in these savanna areas. Similar for the crested doraditos, which alongside the bearded tachuri, they're 2 species in the flycatcher family that have these really kind of bizarre ranges that are sort of left over from the time when South America was much more broadly covered in grasslands. So they've got these little relict populations up in the north of the continent, with the bulk of their population down in the more extensive grasslands in southern South America. White-headed marsh tyrant were pretty common out in the areas where there was a bit of water out in the savanna. You can see the male here is undergoing molt. It's got almost no tail at this point. Jaguars were pretty common. They're the largest stork in the Americas. We saw them several times, and this was quite a scenic encounter with it standing atop its nest. And you can just see a cactus here. So one of the things that surprised me actually is I didn't realize that there were cactuses in Guyana. So from Cayman House, we departed very early one morning and headed to Curassows village, which was about a 2.5 hour drive. The main reason was to go look for a very special bird, which is just more or less in the area of Curassows in Guyana. That is the sun parakeet. So after picking up a local ranger from the village, we headed out down the road that goes into their habitat. And after about an hour, Leon amazingly spotted this pair. He was sitting up on the top of the bus as we were driving along slowly. And he spotted this pair in a tree about 30 meters off the road, and we ended up getting great looks of them for 10 or 15 minutes before we left them in peace. And they are a globally endangered species, principally due to the pet trade. They've been heavily persecuted for that. And then to a lesser degree, but still important, given how small their population is, habitat loss has been impacting them, principally local ranchers and such who are burning the forest habitats they need to create more grassland. So you can see about 1/5 of the global population is in Guyana, and the local monitoring efforts have indicated that they seem to be increasing, which is encouraging. And so while we were looking for the parakeets, we ended up getting really nice views of this adult king vulture on the right. And then after seeing the parakeets and leaving the village, we stopped at a little wetland on the side of the road and got nice looks at a few wetland species, including these yellow-hooded blackbirds. And then also at that wetland, we ended up seeing this drylands tree frog just hanging out in an old abandoned bird nest, which was a bit of a surprise. So the last lodging we stayed at on the main part of the tour was Minari Ranch, which is, you can see, is kind of just this grassland and scattered trees habitat. And we did a bit of birding around the lodge itself, which was quite productive, mostly kind of more common widespread species, but it's nice to get good looks and photo opportunities of things like bicolored wren and orange-backed troupial, as well as this rufous-browed peppershrike, which, like most vireos, you hear them a lot, but you don't necessarily see them very often. So it was quite nice to get a close-up opportunity to photograph one. And this pair of ferruginous pygmy owls was also a highlight. They're a pretty common species, but it's always nice to see a pygmy owl. And this pair put on a little show for us, just kind of hanging out without a care in the world as we watch them. And our first full morning out of Minari Ranch, we went to the nearby Ilang River. So we did a little birding on the way through the savannas, seeing some red-breasted meadowlarks and a double-striped thickney along the way, which they're a large grassland-dwelling shorebird species. And then when we got to the Ilang River, the adjacent grassland to kind of along the riverside forest was someone had lit, so it was all burning, and it attracted a bunch of savanna hawks and white-tailed hawks and aplomado falcons and buff-necked ibis. So it's quite neat to see them all hunting in this burning grassland. So the reason for our visit to the Ilang River is there's two species that have really tiny ranges just along the Rio Branco, which goes down through into Brazil, one of the main tributaries of the Amazon, and then some of its smaller tributaries, including the Ilang. So those two species were the Rio Branco antbird and the hoary-throated spinetail, which we saw both of quite nicely. The antbird posed pretty well for photos, but unfortunately the spinetail stayed kind of in the dense vegetation. And so the last main area we went birding on the tour was the Sand Creek Village, and similar to Curassows, this area is visited principally for one species, and that is the red siskin, which is also globally endangered. Again, because of the bird trade, caged bird trade, which is really prevalent in especially Venezuela and the Caribbean. So there's a lot of pressure on species that have populations just in northern South America like this. So you can see the population's very sort of disparate, just these little populations here and there. But the one in Guyana seems to be pretty stable, a few hundred birds, but there's monitoring efforts and conservation efforts, educating the local people in the villages and working with them, employing some locals to work as rangers and conduct the monitoring. So it seems like they're in a pretty good place at the moment, in Guyana at least. So once we'd connected with the Siskins, which actually in itself, it was a little bit of it took a little bit of time. They like these springs that come down from the hills. So we started out at one spring where the local rangers had seen them. And then about half an hour later, we still hadn't seen any, but we got a call from the adjacent spring. So we walked over there about 10 minutes and finally connected with a little group of them. And from there, we just spent the rest of the morning birding the adjacent kind of dry forest habitat, seeing some nice birds like hooded tanager and white-barred piculet, which was another one of our targets down there. That kind of little corner of the country is the only area where you can get the white-barred piculet in Guyana. And then brown-throated parakeets were a common savanna species. Kind of every day we were in the savannas, we got looks at them. And as we were driving back to Minari Ranch, we checked a couple of these moriche palm swamp habitats, which are these kind of low areas that stay flooded, and they get this type of palm grows in them. And this one species, the point-tailed palm creeper, only occurs in these palm swamps. So we checked a few of the swamps and eventually connected with one, which again got a little video of it calling. So that was the end of the main tour. And so once we were back in Georgetown, we'd arranged to have a trip out to Kaieteur Falls with one of the local general tourism companies. So they had a charter flight going, and fortunately it just so worked out that there were another group of 4 people who wanted to do the trip that day. So we had a full flight and away we went. So when you come into the falls, you do a pass around the falls in the flight, so you can in the plane, so you can see the falls from the air. And then once we landed, it's about a, I don't know, 10-minute walk maybe from the airstrip to the falls. But along the way, there's a lek of these Guianan cochlear rocks. So we got to watch 4 or 5 of them displaying and doing their little dance and antics that they do in all their glory. They're a species in the Cotinga family, and like many of the Cotingas, the males are really stunning, and the males gather in groups and display for the females. And so then there we were at Kaieteur Falls, which is the largest single drop falls in the world. Really just a stunning experience. The falls itself, but then also just looking down the what do we want to call it? The grotto, the arroyo that kind of goes down off to the left there, the canyon, that's a better word for it, that cuts through the Tepuy mountain on either side of the river. Really just stunning. And then I didn't actually include a photo, but along the edges of the area, which are it's this kind of rocky escarpment, there's a lot of these giant bromeliads, and within the bromeliads, there's these little endemic golden frogs. We got nice looks at a few of them. And so that was it. 15 days later, we'd seen 400 plus bird species and had a grand old time. And so after the success of this trip, I've been talking with Dominic Cormier, who's here on this in this meeting, and he's going to guide a trip in March of 27 with Leon again. So if anyone's interested, you can get in touch with either myself or Dominic. We're still just working on getting the promo up on the website, but it should be there within the next month or so. And with that, if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to field them.
I'll just say, wow. The coloration of these South American birds is absolutely stunning.
Yes, it is.
Wow.
Incredible trip.
And great to see the NSBS hats on display as well. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Well, often Ken gives me one on these trips, but this time he didn't, so I had to make do with my Wildlife Conservation Society hat.
Oh, my God, that's terrible.
Yes.
Yeah, what questions have folks got after that? There must be some. That was wonderful. Susan.
I have a question. While you were, well, I guess maybe it's a comment. While you were talking, I Googled the red fan parrot
Oh, yeah.
and a whole list of for sale came up. Yeah, shocking.
Yeah. So a lot of the parrots, there's a big trade in them. Most of the time they are captive bred, but there is, for some of the more endangered things, it's definitely a problem.
Right. And is a fan on a bird unusual? Because I've come across a number of birds that have crests, but it seems that the fan is a bit unusual.
Yeah, it's not, I mean, you think of how the feathering goes on birds, it is more often a crest when you think of cardinals and jays and some of the raptors and whatnot. But there's a few things that have that more kind of fan pattern where it's more of a side to side almost. I'm
Mm,
thinking of things like royal flycatcher. It's another good example of things with a sort of fan on the head.
right. And you mentioned it was hot when you landed, and I noticed there wasn't really a tarmac. It looks like it was a dirt landing strip. How hot was it?
Because you're in the lowlands the whole time on the trip, it was pretty hot. Basically, every day it was probably getting up into the definitely high 20s, low 30s. Yeah, so it's kind of unrelenting, but it's worth it. And when you're in the rainforest, within the shade, it's
Mm,
not so bad. And then same when you're out on the water doing the boat trips, then it's more manageable.
right.
And then often, we would usually be back to the lodge by kind of midday and maybe have a little siesta after lunch and miss out on the hottest part of the day.
Right. Thank you. Looks like a wonderful place to visit.
Hmm.
Talking of the temperature, Avery, what's the humidity like there as well? And also the bugs.
The humidity wasn't too bad. It was relatively humid in the rainforest portion of the trip, but the savanna is pretty dry. And then bugs were really quite limited. People often think of Latin America as, they always think, what are the bugs? There's going to be a lot of mosquitoes and whatnot, but most of the time in northern South America and Central America, we're going in the dry season, right? Because we want to match it with our winter, right? That's when we want to get away, and that's when the dry season is. So the bugs usually are not too bad. The one thing you do have to worry about down in places like, well, almost everywhere in the tropics outside of the mountains are chiggers, which are in the kind of typically in the grassy areas. And so they'll bite around your ankles and around your waist, and they can be a pain. But for things like mosquitoes or black flies and that sort of thing, there's not much.
I discovered that there are ticks in Brazil. Are there also ticks in Guyana?
Yes, I remember having one tick on me. I don't recall if anyone else had any ticks on them on the trip, though. I think they're thin on the ground down there. Something to be aware of, but you're unlikely to come across many.
Any more questions for Avery, folks?
So I have a comment about ticks.
Good.
Good. So we did get a few ticks, Avery.
Okay, did you get some?
Yeah, but I had a medical specialist to take the ticks off me in our room. Thanks, Ken. But the interesting thing is that um, we put them up on iNaturalist, and they are actually ticks that specialize on feeding on turtles or tortoises that we also saw.
Huh.
So, yeah, if people are more interested in that, I can provide them with a species identification. I don't have it on the top of my head, off the top of my head, but yeah, we
Well,
did
that's
get.
cool.
I did get. Well, I think I had two. Ken had at least one. I'm not sure who else had one.
Well, that's great. You were able to get an identification on them as well.
Well, and an iNaturalist observation for a new species, which is good.
Most importantly.
Must be a purpose for ticks, but I can't figure it out. I'm sorry. They are just crazy. Well, a question from Dominic, and I hope I can pronounce this right. Did you see any mata turtles?
I'm not sure what a Matamata turtle is. I remember we saw that one land tortoise. Dave might have a better idea of what that one was. I think it was you probably had it on INAT.
Yeah, yeah. I don't have it right now, but I'll get it.
Yeah, if Matamata turtles are one of the like river species, then I don't think we saw them.
Wow. And those giant otters, I mean, my God, 2.5 meters long?
Yeah, they're quite impressive.
I'm used to otters here, but to see one that size, holy moly,
Hmm.
nearly 7 feet tip to tail.
Yeah. All right, Dominic, after Googling what Matamata turtles are, I can say equivocally we did not see one.
Well, that's fantastic. Any more questions, folks, before we wind down?
Sure.
Hi,
What
Sarah.
was your favorite sighting or bird or experience?
Well, that's a tough one. There were a lot of highlights for sure. I mean, it was really great to see the red siskins and the sun parakeets. You kind of know you're gonna see them, but at the same time to see sort of the efforts of the conservation efforts of the local groups down there, working with the communities, with the local rangers from each village by each respective site, and then getting a little bit of a bit more information about kind of what they're doing and how they're having success with it. That was pretty fantastic. For myself, though, as well, in addition to that, the Guianan red Katinga was probably my bird highlight. Yeah. My number one bird that I wanted to see was the rufous-winged ground cuckoo, but unfortunately we only heard it on 2 occasions and didn't connect with it visually.
Apart from that cuckoo, is there anything that you dipped on that, like a sharp-tailed sandpiper, but anything you dipped on that you really were upset not to see?
Well, I mean, like any of these trips, you're only there for 2 weeks and there's a lot of difficult birds. So there were definitely some species we'd hoped to see but didn't connect. But then that's going to be any trip. Things like crimson fruit crow and blueback tanager we didn't luck out on, but next time.
I have a question. Where did you eat? Like, did the lodges where you stayed have restaurants and buffets or?
Yeah, so each of the places that we stayed at provided us with our meals. there were a couple of times where we, like on our last day prior to our flight home from Lethem to Georgetown, we ate at a restaurant in town. But by and large, we ate at the lodges, yeah.
And what is the food that you see repeatedly? There seems to be something everywhere.
You know, I wouldn't say the food was terribly remarkable. Mostly just variations on starches and meats. But it was fine. I can't really think of anything off the top of my head. I remember Dominic talking about the curries in Guyana. And we did have, because there is actually a relatively large East Indian population there, that has sort of filtered into the cuisine. So you get kind of you get influences of that at times as well.
Those
But, yeah, I
curries,
can't really think off the top of my head of anything that was too like quintessentially Guyanese that we enjoyed.
those curries were mostly in Georgetown. You didn't find that in the Rupununi.
Yeah, fair enough.
Nothing wrong with a good curry.
Absolutely not.
Lots of fresh mangoes.
Yeah, we had a
Yeah.
fair bit of fresh fruit, mangoes, papayas, and the like. Yeah, which is always great.
Sweet. Well, if there's no more questions, let's wind this up. Thanks everybody for joining in tonight. Apologies for the IT issues first thing. Zoom anyway. Yeah, really much appreciated. Thanks, Avery, for your fascinating presentation. Hope to see as many as possible at the AGM and at the next Zoom with AMAR, etc. in November. And my God, there were some fantastic photographs tonight. Just, wow, basically. It was just amazing.
Well, that was
Thank you.
mostly thanks to Dave and Ken, and at
Thanks,
least
Dave
a
and
couple
Ken.
from Pat as well.
Yeah, no, thanks to all of you. It was fascinating stuff. Thank you for sharing. It's most appreciated.
And so, Tony, just before you go, so I put together an iNaturalist project for all our photos and observations from the trip, and several of the people contributed. If anybody is interested in that, they can contact me and I'll send them a link to it.
Cool. Really appreciate that. I'm not sure if I've got privileges back as host. Maybe. The screen's changed a little bit. Who knows? But anyway, really appreciated everybody. Thank you for popping by this evening. Avery, could you do me a favor and message me, email me, whatever, your postal address, please, as well. Most
Okay,
appreciated.
will do.
Thank you very much, everybody. And I think you may well have to end the meeting, Avery, because you've still got host
Yeah.
privileges, shall we say. So the end for all things. So again, thanks everybody for coming by. Great to see everyone. And good birding. And let's hope there's some more migration this weekend, especially in the southwest here.
Okay. Thanks, Tony,
Thank you.
Susan, and everyone.
Perfect. Thank you.